What's going on, everyone? It's your host, the Sports Moose, coming at you. Episode number 8 of our XFL project, Viper's Nest. Got a great show for you tonight. Of course, our usual XFL Week 3 recap. I think we're gonna call this segment maybe the slowest 8 minutes in the XFL. Move over to some. Of course, we'll go in depth of the Vipers and the Roughnecks game. We'll do some good, bad, and ugly, of course, and we'll close it out with a couple hot takes. All coming at you here, episode 8 of the Viper's Nest. Hope you're having a great Tuesday night, as we always do here on the Sports Heap. Let's hit that intro. Happy Tuesday evening. You know what that means when it's Tuesday. It's your recap show here with the Sports Heap on the Viper's Nest. I once again am your host, Moose, rocking the cutoff sleeve shirt today. It's feeling, to be quite honest, I'm feeling a little under the weather most of the day. I don't know if I have a fever or not, but feeling okay enough to do the show, but kind of rocking the PJs today. If you're watching along on YouTube, get to see the guns, free admission to the gun show. Yes, I'll stop the dad jokes now, but once again, welcome to the Viper's Nest. Really excited for our show today. Mostly going to be doing some Week 3 action recap. Always got a great segment with good, bad, and ugly. Really taking a good look at the Vipers game, seeing what went well, what didn't, and what do we need to avoid at all costs. It was so ugly, we need to talk about it and see if we can expel those demons. A couple good hot takes as well. Really, really great action. I think Week 3 might have been the best week so far in the XFL. I think last week was a little rough. A couple games were rough, including Vipers Dragons. But I think this week really did not disappoint. A couple surprises out there as well. As we always do, of course, quick reminder, quick personal, shameless PSA plug. If you're watching on YouTube, great. Make sure you hit that subscribe button below and give this video a like. And we love interacting with you on comments. So make sure to leave some comments. Feel free to troll. Feel free to call out other XFL fans and say how great your team is. We appreciate the interaction down below. Of course, if you're listening to us on podcasting and want to watch us, you can always search for the Sports Heap, which is our mother sports show, if you will, or our YouTube channel where we keep all our videos for our different shows. And then, of course, if you're listening on podcasts, you probably found us on either Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. We're on all four. Pretty easy to find us on most platforms. Any questions, of course, can always reach out to us here on our YouTube channel. We'll be happy to send you a direct link to the podcast platform of your choice. And on Twitter, you'll see my handle down below. I'm Moose, at Moose_TSH for the Sports Heap. You can always interact with me on Twitter, usually tweeting most days, in between work and in between jobs and driving in between job sites. So usually addicted to sports like many of you guys are, and usually tweeting the latest on sports, the Tampa Bay Lightning especially, and of course our Tampa Bay Vipers. As you can see, the board updated behind me. Vipers up to 6. Vipers QBs now up to 6 interceptions. We'll talk about that shortly, of course, when we go in depth to the Vipers game against the Roughnecks. But as we always do, it's time to go around the XFL. The slowest 8 minutes in XFL recap. Let's hit it. Got a little bit of background music for this one too. We'll make sure to bring it down so it's I'm not talking over super loud music. But let's start, of course, Tampa Bay Vipers and Roughnecks were the first game. But let's see if we start with the second game for Saturday. And that was the Dallas Renegades and the Seattle Dragons. Another big crowd over in Seattle. Great crowd. Loud and proud to be Dragons fans. A little bit of a decline from week 2, which was the first home game for the Dragons. I think that was expected. They drew maybe 29,000 last week, and were able to bring that. Came down a little bit. I think the number I saw was 23,000. Still impressive for second division football, if you will. And the atmosphere is always great. I think it was Brock Heward got to light the cauldron there right before the game, and was able to do sideline reporting as well throughout the game. So it's kind of a neat moment. And really, the big story is Seattle staying in the game for the most part with the Renegades. I think with the return of Landry Jones, we really expected this to be a little bit more wide open. In terms of offense, though, I mean, we almost saw 700 yards combined between the teams, and pretty even in terms of time of possession and offensive plays. But really what plagued the Dragons, a little bit of that old Tampa Bay Vipers syndrome, not being able to get the ball across the goal line, at least consistently. Really struggled on fourth down. Their third down percent conversion rate wasn't bad, but they couldn't get the ball in the red zone. I think they went 1 for 1 in conversions inside the red zone, but really untimely turnovers, a couple interceptions, and they didn't lose a fumble, but Brandon Silver's with some tough interceptions for some untimely turnovers. Actually, no, I'm reading that incorrectly. It was actually Landry Jones that had 2 picks, only one by Brandon Silvers. So just not able to convert at key times in their drives. And we'll look at their drives a little bit more closely. So, man, I flipped that in my head. But the big story so far, and we've talked about it the last few recap shows, right, has been Brandon Silvers is that pick, or that delegation, I guess, to Seattle was always criticized and really viewed as perhaps the weakest quarterback to be allocated in the XFL. Didn't play badly. I mean, I'll take a 62% completion rate. I mean, we were really wanting that from Jameis most days, right? 21 of 34, 204. I mean, pretty efficient numbers. And only 1 interception. It did throw the two touchdowns. I don't think any team converted an extra point in this game. But really, when you're looking at the different possessions, yeah, it was just really tricky. They had a punt early on. They had an interception that actually cut off a pretty decent drive. Ran out of time at the end of the half. Turnover on downs, getting deep into Dallas territory. A couple punts and another turnover on downs, and that's all she wrote. I mean, really, it's impressive the number of possessions you're able to get in the XFL when you're looking at quarters. 4 different possessions in both the second and fourth quarters, and that's actually counteracting the 3 and 4 respectively for the Renegades. So possession switches hands pretty nicely. We're looking at an average of 7 possessions in a 15-minute period. I mean, it's like the possession was lasting every 2 minutes. It was kind of bizarre. So again, just really weird dynamics of not being able to get stuff done. And a little bit that happened to Dallas too, again with the 2 interceptions, and I think they lost a fumble, so they had 3 total turnovers, which this game potentially could have gotten out of hand if they were able to convert on a few of those and not really stumble over their own feet. But then again, Seattle just couldn't fully execute. They were just missing something, even though yardage wise things looked okay. Again, the 3-headed monster attack that they employ, rushing, really a mediocre day. Total of 85 yards rushing. And then when you add Silver's in there. They were nearing 100. Of course, Cameron Artis-Payne kind of had a coming out party last week. Had another great week. Over 6-yard average. 13 rushes for 80 yards. Again, Landry Jones really efficient. 30-41 for 274. Did have the 2 picks, but 3 touchdowns. We talked about Donald Parham being the guy to watch at the tight end position. Did not disappoint. 5 receptions, 101 for him. Then, of course, Dunbar, Nagel, and even Artis-Payne out of the backfield leading the way. But really, the lion's share actually had a long 65. Donald Parham with a great day to receiving touchdowns. On the flip side, good to see Austin Prohl back on the stat sheet. Tough day against the Vipers. Much better day against the Renegades. 6 receptions, 81. And I love Keenan Reynolds out of Navy. 4 for 37. Really the leading receivers for the Dragons. So this is a pretty decently played game. I mean, look quickly at the penalties. I mean, penalty yards are pretty even. A couple holdings here and there. Nothing really egregious. I watched a good chunk of this one. I would almost say it's 2 semi-evenly matched teams that couldn't execute. I mean, I think Dallas is the better team here, and they were fortunate that Landry Jones is still working out some kinks. But ultimately, a pretty good game. I think a lot closer than many people thought. Dallas did cover the spread, but 24-12, relatively low scoring. Again, another game that hits the under in the XFL. Let's hop over to Sunday's action. Maybe not so much of a surprise, but the return of football to St. Louis. A couple years there since the Rams left. The Rams leave 14 or 15 over to Los Angeles. It's been about 4 years or so. They only reminded you 17 times on ESPN that it had been 1,236 days or whatever the commentators were saying a million times to remind you about St. Louis football. But it was back, came back with a big exclamation point, a big 29-9 victory over the pretty bad New York Guardians. They used 3 quarterbacks. Marquise Williams, who everyone was pretty excited when he came in. That excitement faded very quickly, and we got to see a little bit of Luis Perez, who you could arguably say performed the best out of the 3 quarterbacks. 4 for 5 for 39 yards. McGloin leaving with an injury in air quotes. Maybe the old Jay Cutler injury that kept him out of the Bears game, right, a few years back. No offense to Jay Cutler. I think he's clarified that he was hurt. But a lot of criticism there about things going bad and having an injury. Pretty good rushing attack, though. I watched a few clips from here because I wanted to check out the Dome in St. Louis to see how the atmosphere was. Cook and Victor had some pretty good runs. They're averaging over 5 yards a carry each. And that's really where most of the bulk of the offense came for the Guardians. 2 of their quarterbacks getting close to 100 yards passing, and then with Luis Perez. But really, quiet day for Mikhail McKay. They were trying really hard to get him the ball, couldn't get open. And really just kind of throwing it to second and third tier talent. Joe Horn Jr. was inactive for the game. Jordan Ta'amu, who's been, I think, one of my big stories for the first 3 weeks, really didn't have to do much. Didn't have to run, didn't have to pass very much. Running game took care of it all. Matt Jones, again, another great performance, 15 for 95. And Christine Michael making an appearance. I think he had a touchdown. His kind of knock has always been his yards per carry average under 4, which has been where we've seen him most of the year so far, but did get a big touchdown, still scrounged up 44 yards. Again, Jordan Ta'amu only had to run for 14 instead of 80 like he usually does, and just had to pass for about 120 yards. It was really an efficient day for the Battlehawks, taking care of business. Really, New York's offense was not on the field very much. I think a lot of their yardage, even though they ended up outgaining the Battlehawks, was kind of garbage time yardage that didn't amount to much scoring at all. Really, only one turnover, one interception thrown. I think it was Marquise Williams. But you're looking at Battlehawks versus the Guardians drives. Lots of punts, lots of turnover on downs for the Guardians, and again, Battlehawks are pretty much just much more effective. Touchdown, field goal, touchdown, field goal. I think the only Marquise only had a punt. Marquette King only had a punt 3 times the whole game. So this one went really much as expected. This game had the largest spread. I think it was the minus 10.5 at the start, and that grew pretty quickly, 29-9. So a big cover for the St. Louis Battlehawks. Still hitting the under though, 38 total points. I think the total here was maybe 42, 43 at the onset of the game. So another under game here for the XFL. Nightcap for the Sunday action before we get to the Tampa Bay Vipers. Your Defenders and Wildcats. This was the big surprise of the week by far. Wildcats 39, Defenders 9. 9 points for the Defenders. An absolutely horrific day for Cardale Jones, who's been an early star within the XFL. LA really coming out to play, and Josh Johnson having a pretty solid showing, 18 of 25 for 278 at a long of 45 yards. And they really didn't have to do much, given a lot of short fields with Cardale Jones throwing 4 picks. So their drives are usually pretty short and resulting in some sort of scoring for the most part. I think they ended up with 5 different touchdowns. Let's look at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 touchdowns. Wow, yeah, 6 touchdowns. I think they converted a couple points here and there. So 6 total touchdowns for the Wildcats. Just really a big game for them. I think very unexpected. They held a 27-0 lead at one point, and I think DC kicked the field goal heading into the half, and then at one point it was 39-3, and then kind of a run by Brissett. Defenders did excel on the ground. I will have to say that was maybe one of their knocks, was their running game wasn't as pronounced as a few other teams out there. Brissett, Pumphrey, and Abdullah having a pretty solid game altogether. I think it was 200 total yards of rushing for the Defenders. Yeah, 200. Only 56 for the Wildcats. 278 in the air coming from Josh Johnson. Relentless defense from the Wildcats. I know we gave them a hard time. Game 1, right? Firing defensive coordinator. Breaking news when that happened. And everyone's like, wow, we're really taking this seriously. Week 1, I guess there must have been some sort of disconnect at that level. So I'm not quite sure what happened, but whatever it was, I guess it got everyone on the same page, because that defense has looked a lot better. They had a close game last week. You could argue that they should have probably stolen that Renegades game. It was a pretty decently played game. I think they're starting to get everything going, so maybe they'll start shooting up on the western side of the rankings, or the standings, I should say. Not too much action on defense. LA, though, with 3 sacks, a couple tackles for loss, and an additional quarterback hits. No sacks for the DC defense, which really has been their strong suit, and what they've relied upon. Kind of an odd day, really. Minimal disruption in the backfield and minimal tackles for loss, even minimal pass deflects. 4 picks, 2 of them by Stevens, Springs, and Tocho, with the picks for the Wildcats. One of the big stories for the Wildcats, of course, has been Spruce, 3 for 75. Their wide receiver, Trey McBride, having a huge game, 5 for 109, I think was his stat line. Don't think he played their first game against the Roughnecks. He was active for the last game against the, I keep wanting to say Desperados, the Renegades, and then really coming out huge game against the DC Defenders. So watch out. There might be some something cooking in LA. And again, Nelson Spruce, I think their leading receiver right now at 256 yards after 3 games. I think he might be the leading receiver in the XFL. So that does it for our look at around the XFL. Let's get to our Week 3 recap. Tough loss for the Vipers. Was it totally unexpected? I mean, you could argue no. I think we were trying to be pretty realistic in episode 7, right? Houston's probably, and now with DC's loss, undoubtedly the best team in the league. Vipers aren't playing the best football. They can't get their crap straight at the quarterback position. So, recipe for disaster, right? And I kind of went in a little bit pessimistic, but was thoroughly impressed by the crowd. What a showing by the Tampa Bay crowd. Hair under 20,000, I think, coming in a hair under 18,000, which I will take, especially in that pretty large NFL stadium with most of the seating in the first bowl and the club section, which I really don't understand why they were selling tickets to the club section. I know sports economics and whatnot, but I'm more for filling up that first bowl and making that look awesome. Looked like it was a great atmosphere. But second, I think we got so close. I think we were tied going into halftime. I mean, we played a really great game. I mean, truly, we really followed the 3 keys, right? Defense had to step up, had to have a little bit of better quarterback play, which I think I would argue that we got in this game. And we had to sell out on the pass and make Houston run, put a little bit of pressure on PJ Walker, which I think we did. But man, if I wasn't convinced before, PJ Walker is the real deal, and he made some incredible throws. I think his wide receivers made some incredible receptions. I think absolute blown coverage in the first quarter after a pretty solid drive, going down the field 30 yards after a good return on the opening kickoff. Franks nails a 48-yarder. One play, 84 yards, and all of a sudden we're in the hole 6-3. But only 6-3. Then we give up a 3-point play, toss from PJ Walker to Mobley. In the blink of an eye, Vipers are down 9-3, and you're thinking, "Oh no, is this getting off the rails? Here we go. Our first drive is another field goal. We needed to get the monkey off our back about actually having an offensive touchdown, right?" And it didn't go well after the next few drives, right? So after that first field goal drive, another 28, 29-yard drive, and we had to punt. Another 22-yard drive in the second quarter, and we had to punt. And then the magic finally hit after some great defensive stands against holding Houston to drives of, I think they went 3 and out for that punt, and then we finally got the ball back in the second quarter where the magic finally happened. We were able to get in the end zone on offense, and guess who it was? Quentin Flowers, QB draw or QB run at least. It looked like it was designed for 7 yards up for the first offensive touchdown in Vipers history, and then we converted the extra point. Vipers had the lead, 10-9, and then a short 4 minutes later, once again, couldn't pull the stop. It's just honestly, absolutely marvelous drive by Houston. Kind of a rough return, starting at their own 24, I think they did, and marched down 76 yards in 8 plays. Touchdown, Houston. They took the lead, 15-10, didn't convert. Ended up with another field goal a few minutes later. And then it was 2-minute drill time or 1-minute drill time. And Cornelius actually able to lead the team down the field 60 yards in 56 seconds. And he ran one in. 2-point conversion to big bad Dan Williams. 18-18 heading into the half. And then really, Houston took a little bit of control over the game. Another 80-yard drive for a touchdown. And that pass was to Cam Phillips. That was really, I think that first drive of the third quarter was the backbreaker. Despite us getting within earshot, they converted the two on a successful run. Cornelius, who I'm going to argue had a pretty solid game, mostly because we were able to pass protect finally. I think we only gave up one sack or maybe two at most. 20-yard pass to big bad Dan Williams. And all of a sudden it's 26-24. And then fourth quarter, couple possessions, exchange of possessions. We kick a field goal. Franks with the second. We got the lead. It's 27-26. And then, unfortunately, that same next drive. Couldn't get another stop on defense. And Houston takes the lead for good. 27-34 or 34-27. And really nothing happening after that. A couple drives that ended in turnover on downs. And then, of course, the big pick at the end of the game to kind of stymie any momentum we had and effectively end the game. So, again, from a glass half full perspective, I think this was the game that we needed. We needed 10-game season, 0-2, 0-3 is a pretty big hole to climb out of. I mean, just from a realistic standpoint, probably going to need 7-3 just to get into the second playoff spot, especially with the way St. Louis is playing right now. And DC, I don't expect that to be a consistent pattern of play with a Cardale Jones 4-interception game. So, I mean, you're looking at winning out to even have a chance right now to get into that semifinal game. But we needed an encouraging game because it had been negative town in the Vipers community online, and as much as we try to pump the team up and try to be like, hey, let's look at this half glass full. I know we're mad at Tressman. I know we want Quentin Flowers to play, but let's step away from the ledge and let's talk through this. And this was a good game. You could argue that the Vipers could have had this had they have made a few key plays, a few key conversions, and a few key stops. Held Houston to 40% third down conversion, which is pretty phenomenal. 2 for 3 out of the red zone for us, and converted 2 out of 3 on fourth down, which was huge. Another big running game, running statistic-wise at least, 130 yards on the ground on 37 rushes. So kind of under our usual average. I think what was one of the biggest disappointments was our run defense, which had been a strength the last 2 weeks. I think defense in general had been a strength, but A, P.J. Walker's really good. B, they really took it to us on the ground. I think they controlled the line of scrimmage on defense, on offense. Really kind of pushed around our guys. We had some decent pressure. I think we were able to get a sack or two, right? Just one sack by Plummer, and really only 3 tackles for loss. So not super disruptive, not really making P.J. Walker have to run around or feel uncomfortable. Not very much of that. And he really torched us, really was able to be surgical and take time and make excellent throws. To their credit, their receivers had to sometimes make some pretty spectacular grabs, but at the end of the day, it was really an amazing performance by Cam Phillips, who, I would argue should be the number one star of the week for the XFL. Almost a 200-yard performance on receiving. Right now for the season, 20 receptions for 324. And this was really his big game. He had been 67, 63, and now 194. He did have that 84-yard bomb, so even if you take that away, he was still over 100 yards. So Cam Phillips is an emerging star. Pretty lethal combination when you have him and PJ Walker. Uh, Great day rushing from James Butler. 72 yards on 7 attempts, was it? Yep, 7 for 72. So an average over of 10. And he had a big 30-yard scamper. Didn't quite get into the end zone. Uh, and then I had 5 yards receiving. So, again, it's really hard to be disappointed. I think if we had to be disappointed in something, it has to be defensive performance, because when you're looking at, I'll take Taylor Cornelius at 16 for 31. The way we've been getting quarterback play prior to that, I'll take 52%. Quinn Flowers looked pretty good while he was in there, 4 for 6. It's 29 yards rushing. I think a big surprise was Taylor Cornelius rushing for 33. And we'll talk about this in hot takes, but I just still don't understand the game plan. I mean, I think it looked a little bit more cohesive. It might have helped that Tressman isn't calling plays anymore. But when you're running quarterback draws of a 6'7" quarterback, or your design quarterback plays, you basically have like a giraffe who's trying to gallop as quickly as he could back there. And to his credit, the offensive line opened up holes, and he was able to convert a couple third downs just by making key runs. But again, I don't know if they're getting ready to play call for Quentin Flowers and they had Taylor Cornelius in there, because there was definitely some play calls that looked like it was for a Quentin Flowers type package, which they didn't really understand. So overall, quarterback play improved for the Vipers, but still kind of a sticking point, and not necessarily the reason why we lost, but potentially the reason why we didn't win was just key plays. It just really comes down to that. The interception was at the end of the game. That's kind of a throwaway. So overall, good job protecting the football. But you gotta when you have the opportunity, you gotta score, and you gotta make some stops on defense. I think that was my biggest disappointment, is defensive performance, and that's just all the credit in the world to PJ Walker and their offense. They are that good. Man, it's just that first play on defense. If you could have that back, absolutely blown coverage, and I don't remember who it was. Looked like it wasn't even play action though, so I don't know what happened. Bit hard or slipped, but freaking Cam Phillips was wide open with no one around him for 20 yards. A quick trot to the end zone, and that was the end of that. So, final score for you: Houston Roughnecks 34, Tampa Bay Vipers 27 in Week 3. So we've talked a little bit about some of these points, but let's take a look at the good, bad, and ugly for Week 3 in the XFL for the Vipers. So good, bad, and ugly. I think good, we talked about it a little bit. Great crowd and environment. I was happy to see a couple of the community out there. I think King Viper had a good appearance, kind of dressed up like a pharaoh with the old school 1800, 1700 style like shoulder brush things. It looked hilarious. And he got on TV a few times. Good seeing a few other members of the Fang Gang out there in force. Looked like the tailgating scene was awesome. And once the stadium filled up, I was not gonna lie, I should have known better as a true Tampanian, tampon, whatever you want to call us. Was panicking slightly at kickoff because the bowl looked pretty empty. I'm like, oh no, it's gonna be bad. But true Tampa fashion, everyone showing up a little bit late, getting their drinks. Maybe forgot the game started at like 3 or whatever it was, or 2 Eastern. Maybe they were expecting a later game. But the bowl filled in nicely. Still don't understand the choice for opening up. I mean, I understand the choice to open up club seating, but I just feel like that takes away and looks worse. I just wish they would have maybe picked a few sections to have club benefits or something. I don't know how they could have made that a little bit better for the experience. But I just hated seeing speckles of fans up in the pewter seats in club. I just feel like it looked a little interesting. Then compliments to the offensive game plan and execution. I think there was still a little bit of confusion with we're going to run quarterback draws and quarterback runs with Taylor Cornelius every once in a while, which was kind of weird. But I don't know. I'd have to say part of this is that Trestman isn't calling plays, even though it seemed interesting that he was hovering over our offensive coordinator, checking what plays he was calling and making recommendations. I caught a few instances on that on the mics, and then the camera. Of course, he was kind of hovering a little bit over the offensive play caller. So maybe it's because it was the first time and he was there to support. Not sure, or maybe in true Trestman fashion, needed to have a little bit of control and his fingers in something. But overall, I was pretty happy with the offensive game plan and execution. I think the play calling was fine. I had nothing egregious like the last few games where we're like, what plays or why are we calling these? And again, execution comes down to your players. I think everyone looked, for the most part, better prepared to play. I think we struggled. I think Nick Truesdale's non-presence or his injury, I think it really affected us. I think we didn't really have a ginormous presence out there. Only threw to 6 different receivers. Jalen Tolliver finally having a solid game. Pretty good game against the Guardians, but you're looking at 104 yards on 13 targets and 8 receptions. So he really was the big presence that Cornelius and Flowers were looking to. Again, I think Nick Truesdale's presence, Goolsby only with 1 catch for a nice 24-yard gain, but again, Truesdale's just such a huge target. Opposing force has made some pretty big grabs the first 2 weeks that I think his presence was definitely missed. Running game, I think was a little bit of a letdown. I think some of those yards coming again on the back end. Really, when you're looking at De'Veon Smith and Jacques Patrick, total of 70 yards. I think De'Veon Smith at 15 for 49, then Jacques Patrick at 10 for 18. That was a rough day for Patrick, with 7 of those coming on one of them on 1 carry. So running game looked a little rough. They were able to get some timely play from Cornelius and Flowers, but on the end, really moving into the pass defense really struggled. Again, PJ Walker, phenomenal, true talent of the XFL, but man, that blown coverage, that's the game. That's the game right there. First play from scrimmage for the Roughnecks, and it's a touchdown. I mean, that was the game. The just the bad read or the slipping or just being totally out of position, that basically is the game there. 100 yards and penalties, by no means a clean game for the Vipers. 99 yards being the official number. Only 39 for the Roughnecks, and I think one of them was a PI for about half of that, or 10, 12 yards of that. So once again, penalties still a problem for the Vipers. We've seen it in games 1 and 2 as well, with multiple false starts and some holding and pass interferences that were pretty clear. I think we got the short end of the stick on one of the PIs that was over 20 yards, so that's kind of a bad beat there. But overall, I would say pretty solid performance, and again, taking stuff with a grain of salt and trying to be as half glass full as we can. I'll take it. Pretty good performance, and once again, just an untimely turnover ended the game. We had to add to the Vipers interception board. We're up to 6 now. Got to minimize that. Got to give yourself a chance. I mean, got to throw that interception into the end zone. I mean, you can't be throwing a pick at midfield as you're driving. You got to give yourself a chance to get in a scoring position, and if you're going to make that interception, make sure it's really towards the end of the game. Really, some of the ugly and, again, kind of anecdotal observations. Missed tackles were huge, and no formal stats being kept yet, at least by the XFL in terms of missed tackles. I man, I feel like there were like 4 or 5 on one play every once in a while. I mean, it was brutal. Just missed tackles led to monumental gains. I mean, another missed tackle was an extra 20 yards carrying, basically, which Houston, again, we had to sell out on the run, but we had to make them run, essentially, right? So that was a part of our 3 keys is, hey, we need to commit to the pass. We're good at pass protection. Let them take the ground game because we're confident in being able to stop them. They really took it to us on the ground, and missed tackles certainly didn't help anything. Still questions about Flowers, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in detail quickly in hot takes, but, the questions are still out there. It's like, is he good? Which I think if you look at his time at USF and what he accomplished, has to be a resounding yes, even though he went in as a running back to the NFL. But, there's questions like, does our own staff trust him, right? And let's leave that for hot takes before we get there. We want to leave that for hot takes. I don't want to go off on Flowers yet. And then last ugly, just the coaching, offensive and defensive. I mean, mostly okay. I was okay with the play calling, so I'm not going to put it too much on offense. But, man, Jerry Glanville, I don't know what was going on. Blitzing way too much, I think, and it really... I know we got to get pressure on P.J. Walker, but when you're leaving everyone in man coverage, I mean, you saw that with Cam Phillips, just torching 100, almost 200 yards receiving, and a lot of that was in man coverage. Yeah, I think we blitzed a little bit too much. So I don't know if it's back to the drawing board on defense or we have to find a way to generate pass rush because we're really struggling generating pass rush. And if you're not having a good pass rush, gives more time to the quarterback, you're going to make anyone look good out there. Let's close it out with hot takes. Got our first item for discussion is any given Saturday/Sunday, with the XFL, of course, playing across 2 days. Are we getting to parity? I think we were concerned, and as you were looking at the spreads this week, 4 very clear, cut and dry winners, right? So if you picked the favorites, the heavy favorites, it was a slam dunk, right? It was the Roughnecks, it was the Renegades, it was the Battlehawks, and the Defenders. Little did we know that the Defenders were going to implode, basically. And Cardale Jones with 4 interceptions and then another fumble by the DC Defenders for 5 total turnovers. And then LA really, possibly playing to their potential. So I'm kind of liking this, that it seemed like early on it was going to be easy to pick. And now I think we're getting to a situation any given Saturday or Sunday where everyone is at the same level. I mean, we can't say everyone's good. This isn't the NFL or, not even college football in the SEC or ACC, if you will. But, these players are all at the same level, right? For the most part. Maybe the range is a little bit wider, right? Because we're casting a wider net. But I think the teams are balanced pretty well. Other than New York, I think New York's clearly the bottom team in the league. So I feel a lot better that we're not at least New York Guardians fans right now, because that really looks bleak over there. I think we saw a lot of positives here, which I hope we can build on and get that first win against a railing Defenders team. We were talking about 0-4 2 weeks ago as a certainty. I mean, if we can, I don't know if the Defenders have another game in like what they played last week in them, but I hope we certainly try on defense. But again, my big hot take here is talent looks like it's pretty evenly spread, and for the most part, barring unfortunate quarterback circumstances like in Seattle, a lot of these teams are pretty even. So I like it. I think anyone has a chance to win, and we'll see what happens next week between the Defenders and the Vipers. Hot take number 2, football should have never left St. Louis. St. Louis is a great sports town, and maybe the Rams were second or third fiddle to the Cardinals and Blues. That there's enough people in the St. Louis metropolitan area to support professional sports teams. I know it's kind of, I don't know if it's funny the right word to say, but they had an effigy of Stan Kroenke as the Battlehawks fans were walking into the stadiums. They had fun with their Stan Piñata and getting to yell stuff like sellouts and other stuff we're not going to say on the podcast, and then kind of beating the the Stan Piñata to pieces. Impressive showing, selling out the entire bottom bowl, which is all they sold, which is what I think we need to do in Raymond James Stadium, but that's neither here nor there. Only sold the bottom bowl, and it looked awesome. Those fans, man, I was so impressed by those fans. I don't know if there's just a lot of cosplay St. Louis individuals out there that happen to have dragon wings available at a whim, or if they bought out like Spirit, the Halloween store, on clearance or something. A lot of people had those flapping dragon wings or gargoyle wings, and it looked awesome. Loved it. Seattle, thumbs up. Right now, I think I'll give you number one. I was really impressed by the Seattle crowd, but that showing on Sunday was awesome. So happy to see football back in St. Louis, and happy that they took to it, and hopefully that remains to be a pretty awesome home field advantage for the Battlehawks. And last of the hot takes, really a big conversation piece, and I'm not sure if we're going to get to it all today as we come to a close with episode 8. Is Quentin Flowers truly a viable QB1 in this league? And I think we have to put asterisk or in this league in quotes, because that's really the big message here. I'll switch over to Moose Cam. We're talking about Quentin Flowers. We got to think about this in this league, because a lot of the arguments I've been seeing back and forth, and to be honest with you, I first fell into the I'm anti-Quentin Flowers camp. This is just the USF lobby essentially wanting to see their boy back in Raymond James Stadium and feel that nostalgia of the amazing performance he had as a USF Bull. But then I looked into it more, kind of was overlooked as a viable QB option in the draft. And it's really interesting looking at some of the records he has. In the 2016 or 2017 season, he was second to Lamar Jackson in total yards, fourth player in FBS history to have 8,000 passing and 3,500 rushing yards. Guy had 70 passing touchdowns in his career, so the guy can throw the ball, and 40-plus rushing touchdowns. Trying to see the specific Lamar Jackson record. He was second only to him in a few categories. Where were we? Yeah. Second leading QB rusher in FBS, and that was in 2016, so I think it was his junior year. He was only behind Heisman winner Lamar Jackson. So he had 1,530 rushing yards and 18 rushing touchdowns. And again, he was fourth in the nation yards per carry, and that's among quarterbacks, like any offensive player. So, again, had an amazing USF career, won lots of awards, owns a lot of USF records, and really top 10 in a few FBS categories. Didn't get a sniff at the quarterback position. I think part of that was, I don't know. I think you want to trust these NFL guys, right? Now, we've kind of criticized some of the coaching selections to a degree because the XFL wants to be this groundbreaking and offensive league and shift stuff towards the offense, but then they're bringing in old school and conservative type coaches that don't necessarily run an offense that would have featured Lamar Jackson in a non-traditional role like we saw this year with Baltimore. And I kind of scoffed initially at the people calling for Quentin Flowers to be a Lamar Jackson type figure, and then actually didn't realize he was second only to Lamar Jackson in a few categories. So I'm kind of on the Quentin Flowers bandwagon now, and I'm sorry I'm a late adopter. I wanted to see Cornelius succeed so badly, and it seems like Aaron Murray is going to be back in week 4, and we'll talk about that on Thursday night or Friday night as we do episode 9 and the preview show for week 4. So I don't know. I think either way we got to figure out what we're going to do. I think he can be a viable QB1 option, but we need a different coach, or at least an offensive play caller who's going to gear the offense around him, which is what we wanted. I mean, what we thought Trestman was going to do, right, with those special packages, bring him in, wildcat, QB run. But I think he's a multi-dimensional player, and I think he can be a QB1. I mean, I just don't understand why we're so focused on this traditional quarterback model, step back and drop. Aaron Murray doesn't really particularly have wheels. We saw Taylor Cornelius's wheels kind of max out there, despite his best efforts to almost have 40 yards rushing. So I just don't understand. I mean, certainly a good way to alienate your fan base. There's definitely a lot of hate being thrown his way, or Trestman's way, or coaching staff's way, with some of the decisions being made. Especially, man, that comment at the post-game interview right after the end of the game. I could imagine people's minds just exploding with Trestman stating, "Oh, I wish I could have played Quentin Q a little bit more in the second half." You could have. Definitely could have. So, I don't know. We'll have to see what happens week 4. Fully expect no changes. I expect Aaron Murray to be back in there. At least hopefully we'll get Nick Truesdale back, right? Get a little bit more offensive firepower. And we'll see what happens if Aaron Murray's ready to go. I still want to see Quentin Flowers be the guy, right? And give him a chance. And run an offense that he can be successful in. Looking at Lamar Jackson. Again, not saying he's Lamar Jackson, but when you're looking at a field of players and a league where players are within the same level, there's no reason why he couldn't be the Lamar Jackson of the XFL. Well, I think that brings us to the end of episode 8. Thanks so much for listening. What a longish episode here. Hope you had a good time. I love talking about the Vipers. I've learned so much. Emrod was kind of our resident expert, and Emrod's last night in his house is tonight. So, of course, Man Cave is all packed up for him. Fully expect him. He'll be going to the game week 4, so we'll get to get his perspective for the DC recap show next week. So we'll do the week 4 preview. It'll just be me, probably Thursday or Friday. And then Emrod should be up and ready to go for the DC Defenders recap show next Tuesday. Thanks so much for listening and watching. Again, quick reminder, find us on YouTube, The Sports Heap. And you can see all our shows, which include The Viper's Nest, our XFL Tampa Bay Vipers related show. And again, I'm your host, The Sports Moose. Find me on Twitter at Moose_TSH. Feel free to follow and send me some DMs. Happy to talk Vipers. Happy to talk Lightning with you. And then, of course, you can always listen to us on podcast platforms, on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google. It's been your host, Moose. We'll see you next week, we'll see you in 2 or 3 days for episode 9, the week 4 preview. Have a great night. We will see you.